Good morning. Happy Tuesday. This is Anna Maria Manalo for the Sinister Archives podcast. Great to see you here again today. Glad you are listening in. For this week, I will tell you a story which is going to be in 4 parts. It is called The Mound, and it comes from part of my book, which is called Portal, A Lifetime of Paranormal Experiences, which is available on Amazon. As life would have it, people marry, get divorced, have children, or remain childless. They age and eventually pass to the netherworld. Somewhere in the middle, those who remain divorced have their children to assist them in old age, and some, though distant in geography, will call, send emails, text, or whatever they consider a contact. For others, children are a way of ensuring that the next generation will remain on the planet. For others who are divorced or are widowed without children, the suddenness of being alone, anonymous, save for a few close friends and perhaps a myriad of acquaintances, the possibility of living alone or aging alone is very much a probability. This next story is about a woman who lives actually in the next town from me. And she shared her story via her brother, whom I will name Paul. This riveting account of a life that's forcibly lived alone in a haunted location comes from Paul. One day, Paul shared his story with me after she passed. He talked about his efforts to help his older sister rid herself of the evil that she had appeared to have invited, and he related the following story. May, a name I will use for this woman, lives alone in a small neighborhood by a river. Her home, part of the settlement of a divorce several years back, sits perched with its backyard facing the river. The stone house which she lives in is over 50 years old, but she has maintained it well. A high cement wall separates her home on both sides from her neighbors and from the edge of the river. However, a view of the swiftly moving river can be seen from her second-floor bedrooms and through a wrought iron gate that separates the garden backyard from the path leading to the river. The garden behind the house sits resplendent with giant cone flowers hugging the path leading to the water. Wisteria vines wind around the patio's whitewashed pergola, while iron chairs, painted in white, lend a stable permanence to the fieldstone floor of the patio. We now flash back to a decade ago on a summer day, with the river replete with small yachts, fishing boats, motorboats, in the height of the summer season. Sounds from the banks on either side of the river could sometimes be heard, as both sides of the bridge that connected them boasted a quantity of high-end Michelin and Zagat-merited restaurants. The area was a bustling tourist town, where people from out of state frequented the quaint shops, boutiques, as well as the bed and breakfast establishments. Picturesque and unique, May's home and the homes around her increased in value as the popularity of the area became known as a haven for artists, writers, and filmmakers. Inside the French doors past the fieldstone patio, above the cacophony of summer sounds, we hear a man yelling, reprimanding a middle-aged woman with strawberry blonde hair. She was slim and of medium height, hunched over in defeat in a worn-out sweater. The woman was May. She was visibly upset, obviously on the verge of tears. She sat on a stool perched at the end of a well-appointed, though small kitchen, as the man before her in a leather vest, sporting a tattoo of a serpent, much taller than her, hovered and dominated the room with his gruff voice. He bolted out of the kitchen, leaving May alone with her thoughts, still tremulous after the confrontation. The door slammed and he rushed to the garage, pulled out his large motorcycle, and stepped out, hitting the kickstarter. May watched him as he roared out of the driveway, past the open gate, and into the narrow street. So was a typical day in May's life. May was the second oldest of 5 children. 2 of her siblings, boys, one now in his 40s, lived several miles away in a different town. The third and younger brother, who related the story, lived a few miles from her. Her youngest sister lived near New York and had a family of her own. Despite the relative peace in which their parents raised them, May's life was punctuated with one failed relationship after another, and a home which you will see seems to house a malevolent entity that would later manifest itself. May was like a mother figure for her husband. He, in turn, lived the lifestyle he had grown accustomed to, waking up late, reading the paper cover to cover, as she worked long hours as a fashion designer. It was months after his discharge from the hospital, on one extended week-long trip to New York City, when he was supposed to be recovering, May discovered that the man who lived under her roof was having an affair with his former nurse. Crushed and betrayed by the husband she doted on, May blamed herself for her long hours away from him. Instead of seeking a divorce, however, she apologized. Soon the husband took advantage, asking for a raise in his allowance in order to go away on short jaunts to upstate New York with his paramour. As May's nerves began to fray from both the demands of her work schedule and the repeated clandestine meetings she would catch time and again, she began to sequester herself in the back of the house, overlooking the river. It was on one of those evenings, angry and emotionally exhausted, that she worried herself to sleep in the living room, overlooking the backyard and the river beyond. May awoke to the sound of flute music, accompanied by what sounded like the strum of a harp. In the darkness, she slowly sat up and noted the half hour of midnight. She glanced out the open French door to her patio and the gate beyond, and unable to shake the feeling of her deteriorating marriage, May decided she would walk out to the patio. She crossed the grass of the garden. She exited the iron gate and looked out at the river just a few feet from where she stood. She inhaled, hoping to calm her nerves, when a few minutes later she noted movement to her left. Fearful of an intruder, May turned her attention to the left, where the ground receded to the river's edge. She backed away just in time to feel someone or something brush past her and dash for the river ahead. A man in shadow who appeared naked or clad in a skin-tight outfit bolted into the river. She watched the fleeting glimpse of him as he disappeared into the river without a splash. It was as if he just entered it without disrupting the surface of the water. Taken aback, terrified and feeling the hairs on her arms rise, May dashed back to the garden, shut the gate, latching it into place. She crossed her garden and returned to the safety of the living room. As she looked out the French doors, she turned the lock, exhaled, and then surveyed the quiet and dim living room. Upstairs, she heard the sound of creaking, reached for her cell phone to call her younger brother, Paul. She was definitely terrified. Minutes later, he came as she stood by the front door, sweating in fear. It was already 1 a.m. Police could find no trace of footprints in the garden or out by the river, where she reported she'd seen the man bolt into the river. More than ever, May wished for a man who would love and protect her. Despite the counsel of friends and siblings, May doggedly held on to her toxic marriage, blaming herself for the continued tryst. One day, now partially living with his paramour, her husband left without notice. May contacted the police in denial, claiming her husband had met with misadventure and might be hurt. In less than 2 days, however, the lost husband was found. He filed for divorce, arrogantly accusing her of meddling in his affair when she should have known the marriage was over. Just like the marriage May had, the ex-husband reportedly relied on the new woman for support. As soon as the divorce was final, May finally removed her husband or ex-husband's name from the bank accounts, and he started relying on a new woman for support. As the years went by, as if the marriage had been idyllic, May pined for her ex-husband, a man who remembered his birthday but not hers, and bought lavish gifts for himself on her credit cards. May's former friends, women who had careers like her, who dressed and acted self-assured, were repelled by her behavior. May justified her actions among her siblings, and not 2 months later, unable to tolerate the silence in her house, May was once again sitting alone at clubs against the advice of her well-meaning friends. Like them, she had been young once, and they understood her, if not sometimes unspoken, flirtations. However, May was now approaching her mid-40s. She had married late, bypassing all the men who had risen to their careers, who ended up being respected businessmen, lawyers, and professors. Some had become artists in their own right, physicians, sales representatives,